Hello everyone and welcome back to another instalment of the Warwick F1 show. Today we are going to be talking about the 2024 Spanish Grand Prix that we have just seen last weekend, which saw the same top two emerge from Canada, a top two that I think we're going to get very familiar with as the season progresses. Verstappen finishing P1, again just edging out Lando Norris in the McLaren by 2.2 seconds and closing by the end of the race. It was another tight scrap as well, I guess, from the teams behind them of Mercedes and Ferrari. Ferrari back up there from where they were, their poor performance in Canada, but Mercedes still managed to edge out Ferrari, finishing P3 and P4. Hamilton with a very nice podium compared to how their season's gone so far for Mercedes. Alpine had a very good showing as well, another double points finish for them with finishing P9 and P10. They seem to be on the up as the season progresses. And some disappointing races perhaps from Aston Martin and also from Alex Albon and the two RBs. We shall be talking about all of that and more in this episode. I am joined by both of the wheels. How are you guys doing? What did you think of the race that we saw last weekend?
No, I thought it was pretty entertaining for a Spanish Grand Prix. I don't think you come into Catalonia and think it's normally going to be that good, but we got quite a bit of overtaking at the top. I think there are different strategies at play that really made it like the race interesting throughout, and I think it's just good to see now that you really do have like 6 or 7 drivers that are competing with one another. It's not really anyone that's running away with first. Like Verstappen's obviously competing with Norris. The Ferraris and the Mercedes now seem to be in a battle as well. And I think it just shows that we've come such a long way in terms of having the teams be able to compete. And obviously there are stuff that we do want to improve on, but I think generally it was a lot better than I expected. I'd probably give it a 7 out of 10 for overall. And I think for Spain, that's a pretty good performance.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you. I think it's kind of the format we want to see going forward, where cars are going to have to make multiple stops and you can kind of extend and have that tyre advantage at the beginning or the end. But I did think it really showcased the weakness of this kind of Catalonia track. Like, yes, everyone has tested their load, so everyone knows how the car works. Less so in recent years, but there's a lot of data for this track. But also there's one true overtaking place unless you have a massive tyre advantage, which I just don't think is really worth it. Like, hypothetically, say everyone had just done one stop or done 2 stops that pitted around the same time, it would just have been a dreadful race because you wouldn't have had any real overtaking. There was no overtaking on pure pace. It was just because you have fresh tyres, which I think, is better than what we've been having, but also you could kind of just see where they were going to end up. Like, you kind of knew Norris wasn't going to catch Verstappen, and you knew Leclerc might catch Russell, but even then, if he did, he might not be able to get past because it is ultimately just save your battery all up and just use it on that one straight. So I'm probably going to give it a 6, I think, because it was entertaining, but I think there's still room for actual racing to kind of take place.
Yeah, certainly. We did see, I think we can safely say the majority of overtakes in that turn one with the drivers saving up all their battery and all of their power in their car for that DRS back straight. And I think, like we said, it was good with the different strategies. Obviously, the 2-stop opening up the different tyre choices and the different stints that the teams are able to do. But I think as well, I was maybe a little bit disappointed. Not because it wasn't necessarily a bad race. It definitely did have a lot in store to keep us entertained, I think. But certainly from what we saw in qualifying, when it was this kind of very close battle between Norris and Verstappen, and then we almost lost that in a way by Norris's poor start, which we'll talk about in a minute. Russell moving into P1. And if you work it out at the end with that kind of 2.2 second gap from Norris to Verstappen when it comes to the end of the race, that's in a way the time that he lost from his poor start to Verstappen after getting bogged down from P1 to P3 behind Russell and Verstappen, as I say at the start. And so you could think that on any other day, if Norris could have kept that advantage into the first corner and on the first couple of laps, then we really would have been in store for an amazing race when it comes to the end, and not the kind of what we've seen in other previous races this season, where it's just Norris getting closer and closer to Verstappen. But really, it's even though we have these kind of overtaking predictions that they do, it's one thing to catch up and another thing to overtake, and maybe we kind of got the same feeling this race, that we never really thought that Norris was going to actually have much of a chance of actually overtaking Verstappen for the win. But I think I'd agree with that. It was a 7 out of 10. I'd say it was a fairly solid race and fairly entertaining compared to the likes of what we've had this season. But we'll go straight into winners and spinners. And as I mentioned, obviously Verstappen won. No real surprise there. And I think we could all talk about that he's done a solid job. But I want to focus more, I'd say, on Lando Norris, because the whole race he was saying that obviously his team were debating, do you cover off Russell? And his response was, no, I want to go and try and fight the Verstappen in front. And I think he was right in the sense that with the pace that his car was showing this weekend, that he had the potential to win the race. And was it maybe down to his errors, namely at the start of the race, which was the reason that they were bogged down and made it difficult for themselves, essentially? I don't know. What did you guys think of Norris's performance? And was it realistic for him to actually say that they were true competitors of Verstappen? Or was that just maybe a bit optimistic?
No, I definitely think that they could have won that race. And I think what you're seeing at the moment is just the experience of winning, I guess. Because at the moment, Red Bull are operating on such a high level. Everything is going right for them. Their strategies are good. Their pit stops are good. Their driver is obviously brilliant. And on the other hand, you've got McLaren, who, like, as of a year ago, was still not competing anywhere near the top. It's kind of coming into Austria and then Silverstone that we start to see McLaren back on the podium regularly. And they do have a driver that, yes, he has won a race in Miami, but it's only one race. And again, he's not had really a consistent run at the top step of the podium, like outside of last year. And even last year, because Verstappen was so far away from everyone else, it was very much second was the best option that they were going to get. But now we're seeing it's definitely that the McLaren, I think, is not maybe the fastest car. I think it's very level with the Red Bull, but it can compete for wins. He can compete with Verstappen. He's just got to kind of get that experience of being able to do so and stop, I guess, making those mistakes. And like, it was just that start, because I don't think anyone expected George Russell to go flying around the outside and take the lead. But when he gets stuck behind Russell for, I think it's about 15 laps, and then Verstappen's able to build that gap, it makes it so Norris has to overcome such a big gap and isn't able to do so. And without maybe getting stuck behind Russell, without that poor start, I think he would have won that race. And I don't, like we were saying it before we started, but how he won driver of the day, I'll never work out, because he went, at the end of the day, he went from first to second in a car that could and probably should have won that race. And I don't think you can be giving out driver of the day for something like that.
Yeah, I think I agree with you, Will. I think it was his own mistakes. I can't believe I'm going to say this. I think Helmut Marko summed it up really well. He said that although that McLaren is probably the fastest car on the grid at the moment, I think in my opinion as well, Lando can't drive without mistakes yet, which Max has kind of proven over the last years. He is just this almost error-free driver at the moment, that he is just consistently going through and performing at such a high level that we haven't seen Lando do that yet. I think you mentioned his one win, but he was kind of not necessarily handed it, but like he was put in the best position to succeed. He had that kind of that lead and on the newest tyres. We've not seen that from Lando yet. We've not seen him have to come and get past Max or show that he is faster, which I think everyone's kind of waiting for. And then his kind of strategy as well, like it just wasn't, he almost left it too long and was focusing so much on winning he didn't see the bigger picture that actually we need to be near Max to get past him, not use up all of our fresh tyres to get anywhere near him. So it's a bit of a tricky one. I just don't think he drove to his potential, and I think he was just a bit flustered by his own mistakes to kind of capitalise on how good that car was.
And we've certainly seen that for the past 2 races where it's just Norris getting closer to Verstappen, and it's never really been he's lacking maybe a bit of pace in the car as well, but certainly in how his race has gone, that he isn't close to Verstappen when it matters. And there was a point in the race, I'd say about probably a third of the way in, where Norris's race engineer said, does he want to cover off does he want to cover off Russell, or does he want to extend? And he chose to extend on those tyres, and that's why he came in later. But in the same time, he had that 8-second deficit, which ultimately he failed to make up by the end of the race. Do you think it would have been a different story and a different outcome should he, or if he had chosen to come in at that moment and maybe aligned himself more with the strategies that his competitors were going, rather than trying to go further on into the race with that older set of tyres? What do we think of that?
I might disagree with Will a little bit here, and I do think that the strategy they went on was the only one that could have won them the race. Building that offset, obviously you do lose a few seconds of time, but you do get that tyre offset that you can then get those seconds back and then ideally take it to the driver that you're trying to overtake. I just think in that final stint, while maybe the McLaren is faster, I don't think it's that much faster. I think it was when you had 8 seconds, like he had a solid, I think it was about 15, 16 laps to try and close it down. And it was only really right at the end. And I think that was a bit of Verstappen knows he's got this in the bag. So he backs off a little bit, maybe saves some of the tyres, saves some of the battery if Norris suddenly starts charging towards him. But realistically, I think the offset was the only way they were going to win. And I do think just the race was lost at turn 1. And then after that, when he allowed kind of Verstappen to get that gap to make that margin after he overtook Russell. And then I think it was just a kind of step too far for McLaren and Norris.
Yeah, I think it was kind of his not lack of confidence, but I don't think he felt comfortable that he could close and overtake a 4-second gap on like 2 lap fresher tyres. Just because I don't think we saw Verstappen ever fully push in that race. I think this reminded me a bit of some of the races towards the end of last year where you had those cars that were strong, but he didn't have to push to make a massive gap. Like he could maintain it, look after his tyres in first. So I think Will, you're right in that strategy was the only way to do it. But I just don't think he felt confident that he could close that gap, even if he had just gone, let's stop the Mercedes let's get in front of them and use all of our tyres to overtake Max. When if he had done that, I don't think he would have managed to overtake him. So I think he was just hoping to get that tyre advantage.
So you think it was a mistake from McLaren to maybe expect him to make up that kind of 8-second gap in a way? Or a mistake from Norris thinking that he could be optimistic and do that in the first place? Because, asking to make up an 8-second gap on a driver who has been probably on the longest form that we have ever seen in a while is quite an ask. And obviously by the end as well, it was like Norris was making up some time on him, but then his race engineer for Verstappen, he had to say to him, go to this mode. And then suddenly he's maintaining that gap. And that's probably a sign that he actually wasn't pushing initially. And that's why Norris was able to make up that time on him. And so, so we're saying maybe it's a bad call from Norris in a way that he should have been a bit more realistic is what we're thinking.
No, I don't think it's that. I think their strategy was right and his his decision was correct to stay out longer. But I think having looked at their first stint as well, they should have said, look, we didn't gain any time. We had this massive tyre advantage. Ultimately, it was the same 4 seconds as when I pitted. initially, or before Verstappen pitted initially. Let's try something different. I think the only way they were going to be able to comfortably overtake him was the massive tyre advantage. But I think it would have been worth them trying it the other way to get that kind of, let's use all of these tyres on attacking Max. But I don't think that would have been enough. So I think Lando was going, I want to win, not I want to get as close as possible. So there's not really a right and a wrong. I think it's just whatever he wanted to try and do most.
No, I think that makes sense, and certainly they can't say that they didn't come close. I mean, it's 2-second gap, and you may argue that if they did have a few extra laps on them in the race, then Norris would have been able to close down and put more pressure on Verstappen. But I guess we'll never know. We'll come on to the Mercedes and the Ferraris a bit more, but I just want to touch on their teammates as well. So Perez and Piastri both kind of bogs down a little bit, I guess you could say. Obviously, Perez we come to expect it nowadays, but Piastri was unfortunate for him only in P7 and couldn't make it up any further. And I guess he was kind of stuck in that position as he qualified in P10 and couldn't really make up that much of an advantage in the race. This is a poor race from both of them, I'd say, isn't it? It's not like they really had much going against them in the race. I think Piastri. Do we think that he has to be nearer Norris? Surely, like he qualified P10, and it's you think that, and as well that could have been the difference in the race if he's up there, and if Norris has a teammate to maybe so you could pit him early, and then Verstappen has to cover him off, and then it's 2 against 1 because if Perez was down and Piastri was up in the top 3 or 4. Then that could have affected the dynamic of the battle, but he's not there, and instead he is where Perez is down around the bottom points positions, and so he has to improve in future, doesn't he? Because this is what's going to because we know that Perez isn't going to be as good, and so maybe that's the dynamic that needs to change.
I mean, I think we've got to remember with Piastri, he's still quite early into his F1 career. Realistically, Norris is the number one driver. He's been at the team since 2019, so he's got the backing. And I think for Piastri, it was just kind of qualifying, not getting a proper lap in. Qualifying P10 kind of meant that he's a bit stuck in terms of what he's able to do. I think that there is that gap, I think, in performance, and that puts Piastri kind of at the level of the Mercedes and the Ferrari. So if you can't maybe get to their level, P7 is the best result. But no, I do think that if he had qualified properly, I think we're discussing an entirely different race where he is also kind of with the Mercedes and the Ferraris challenging them. He might not be up with maybe Verstappen and Norris, but I just think those two are just a step above them, or they're in better cars and they're kind of the best drivers to show for it. And I think there is that gap between Norris and Piastri. I wouldn't be too harsh on Piastri just because, again, he is still kind of getting into it a bit more. We've seen him be able to perform. I think, was it 3 races ago, he was P2 at Monaco. We know he can do it, and I do think it was a poor performance, but I think it just comes down to quali and not getting that lap in, and especially these days because qualifying is so close, not being able to do that can put you P10 when you should be kind of P3, P4, P5.
See, I think he had a really strong race. I think, unlike his teammate, he finished ahead of the Red Bull that he started behind, whereas Norris went the other way, which, I mean, it's Perez, which doesn't say a lot, but still, I think the first stint kind of summed up this track in that you can't get past anyone, even if you're in the fastest car. He kind of got stuck behind those Alpines. Had a really good qualifying performance. But then after that, I think he ended the race sort of 2 seconds behind Sainz in 6th. Like he had that pace. He was faster than the Ferraris and the Mercedes. So I don't think he necessarily had a bad race. I think his qualifying was poor, especially by his standards, because he's been so good in that session over the last, both seasons actually. But I think it was just he was put in from that, he was then nowhere near in the question because of just you couldn't overtake early, which meant he just fell really far behind all the leaders. So I think to be even within a couple of seconds of the Ferraris after that was quite impressive. I think he definitely, had he had a better quali, definitely would have finished third, if not higher. I mean, if he actually had a good start as well. So who knows? He might have been leading into turn one instead.
So we're saying that it's obviously a poor qualifying, but then given that qualifying, it was actually quite a successful, fairly successful comeback drive potentially. And do we think that maybe, obviously, Verstappen's going to be difficult to beat for Norris if see this battle continue further on into the season with Norris and Verstappen. And do we think Piastri could maybe play an important role in that, in the races that he's up there, that could be the difference? That could be what McLaren need to get the edge on Verstappen, is having that second driver where Perez is often not there. And do you think that could make a difference?
I think we're naive in thinking there's going to be a championship battle this year. I think Verstappen's too good. I think he's clear. If it's not going to be about beating Verstappen, I think it's going to be about maximising points and getting the Constructors' Championship, not the drivers. I think if whatever team out of Ferrari, Mercedes, McLaren can optimise that, so they're getting those, say the odd win. Like Verstappen's not going to win every race. But I don't trust, the only drivers I trust to beat Verstappen are probably Leclerc and Hamilton. I don't think anyone else, if they're in similar machinery, can beat him yet. Because I think we've seen Leclerc and Hamilton both do it. We've not seen Norris do it where he's had to get past him yet. So I think if you're McLaren, whichever team, not just McLaren, sorry, it's going to be about optimising those points they can get on a weekend and basically capitalising on Perez being ultimately a bad driver at the moment. And okay, yeah, it's not that close at the moment, but if McLaren get second, third in the next, or even first and third in the next few races, who's to say that by the summer break they're not leading the constructors, depending on reliability and Perez's performances? So it's not going to be a driver's battle and how can we get our drivers to get ahead of Verstappen? It's going to be about how can we optimize our points to get the constructors, not the drivers.
I'm surprised how much faith you have in Leclerc. Like you predict him high quite a lot, and I'm not sure the performances justify it personally. I agree that he has a high potential, and I think he's got more to give out of him from what we've seen this season. Obviously, he won in Monaco, but
I mean, he's the only driver this year to finish in the top 5 every race that's finished. When he's finished, he's the only one that's done that this year. No one else has done that.
Because Verstappen was P6 in Monaco.
Yeah, so no, I think
I did not see that stat coming.
The issue Ferrari have had, when the car has been good, he has been good. Ultimately, apart from 2 races this year, he's outclassed Sainz. Even at his home, even in Sainz's home race, he's been better. I think he's got that speed, but the car at the moment, it's not good in those high speed corners, which is what's so important in Spain. In qualifying, Verstappen was full throttle through these high speed turns. The Mercedes and McLaren's were 90% throttle, and the Ferraris was 70%. They're going to lose so much time there. So, when you're on a full tank of fuel, that's going to be even worse, which I think is why we saw them struggling. I mean, yeah, I'm sure his strategy benefited him, but ultimately, he was the one that was challenging Russell for 4th in a car that was slower, whereas his teammate was almost under pressure from the driver that started 10th. So I think, yes, he's not had an extraordinary season, but I think he's still third in the championship in a car that, apart from maybe 3 races this year, has been third or worse on the grid. So I think that kind of says what you need to know.
That's fair enough. Sorry, Will, did you have anything you wanted to comment on Norris and Verstappen?
Oh, no, I just think I completely agree with Will. The Constructors' Championship this season is up for grabs if they don't sack Perez. I famously not rated Perez that much, and if he's going to keep being... Because realistically now, the Mercedes and the Ferrari are close. They might not be up with the level of the McLaren and the Red Bull, but they are close enough that the gulf in performance gap between Verstappen and Perez is now being filled by 7 cars or 6 cars. Or 5
they have
cars.
cemented themselves in between Verstappen and Perez. Yes.
Yeah, which means ultimately, at this point, 25 points for Verstappen is crucial because it's being supplemented by 4 points or 2 points or 6 points at max from Perez. And if McLaren can get a second and a third, a second and a fourth, a third and a fourth, they will chip away at that gap, and they will make the Constructors' Championship more competitive. And for the teams, that's a big part of it, that they do get the money from the Constructors' Championship. And I think that's where Piastri can come into it. I think that's where he needs to perform. I guess he needs to perform a bit better in terms of his quality, be a bit more consistent. And if he can do that, then McLaren have a chance of challenging Red Bull for the Constructors' Championship, which obviously would be a big goal for them, which is what they haven't won in over a decade now. And I think that is where Piastri can come in and be helpful. I don't think that he may be in races. I think it's more of if we think back to 2021, you think how far and away Hamilton and Verstappen were from their teammates, and it kind of they only really came into concerns at a select few races. I think it's kind of that situation. But if Piastri can get up there, if McLaren can continue to improve, there's no reason why he can't help them try and lift that Constructors' title at the end of the season.
No, you make a good point, and it is becoming that gap, almost embarrassingly so if it wasn't before, that gap between Verstappen and Perez. And for this race, both Mercedes and both Ferraris slotted in there quite nicely. Mercedes edging over Ferrari, coming P3 and P4. And obviously they were able to do that last race in Canada. Is this an actual pace turn, because I think, do Ferrari maybe expect to be a little bit more down compared to Mercedes for the next few races when we talk about this race in Austria and Silverstone in 2 weeks' time, and then maybe when we come to races that come after that, like the Hungaroring, for example, that's when we'll see Ferrari back to where they were maybe at the start of the season, and so it's more down to the track as such.
I think Ferrari has said they expect to be sort of that third, fourth place team in the next few races, especially Silverstone, I think, with these high-speed corners. Austria, I think, is a bit of a tricky one because you look at the major overtaking zones, they're all out of slow corners, so we'll see how that goes more. But and we'll talk about that in our next episode when we preview Austria. But I think they're looking forward to get back to those low-speed, low-corner tracks. And I think, talking about Mercedes, I think they're in a position very similar to McLaren in that they're very good at high-speed corners. They're good at those medium high-speed cornering, which a lot of the calendar is based around ultimately, and it is going to serve them really well. So if they can keep that up and then get better in the slower corners, then we might have that title fight that we've kind of been talking about. But I think for Ferrari, I think it's about maximizing their points these next few races. And then when their car is strong, trying to pick up those wins. So it was a disappointing weekend, given that it's one of their drivers' home Grand Prix. But I think they kind of knew it wouldn't be their forte. There isn't really any low-speed cornering. And when there was, that's when the Ferraris were actually closing up to the cars in front. So I think it's just what they expected.
I'll come at this from the Mercedes perspective because, it's quite...
I thought you might take that standpoint.
But it looks as though they're not back, but it does look as though the upgrades that have been brought, that front wing, have made Mercedes competitive, at least with Ferrari, and are able to now compete for kind of those podiums, for maybe the upper to middle end of the points, so the thirds to fourths, the fifths. And I'm just happy to see Lewis Hamilton back on the podium. I think I would say yes, he probably was fortunate with the strategy, and it's weird because he was fortunate because he was second to pit. I think, but this was to do with Ferrari as well. I think Sainz and Russell both going on the hard tyre, and immediately it was clear that the hard tyre wasn't the one to run, allowed Leclerc Hamilton to go onto that soft tyre and try and basically overtake their teammates quite easily. But for Hamilton, he had a great race. I think you saw quite a few good overtaking manoeuvres. Obviously, the one on Sainz was particularly good. I think the one on the one on Russell was quite assertive, I think, and it does maybe point a little bit towards not the frosty nature of their teammate, but they're not. I think they're co-workers more than friends. But once obviously Hamilton gets up into third, that is realistically the best he's going to do. But I think it was encouraging to see that Hamilton was able to perform. He's not lost it all just yet. And I think for Mercedes, it is finally a vindication of some upgrades that do work, and they are now back challenging for the podium. And I mean, hopefully it can kind of continue.
Yeah, it's giving end of 2022 Mercedes, where they were like kind of back, but not really back.
Yeah. You know that clip of Rio Ferdinand saying like Man United are back. This is giving the same vibes as that. Sorry to make a football reference, but yeah, it's giving me similar vibes of you saying that they are back, but then it might be from a slightly biased perspective. I guess we'll see in the next coming races to see it, but it could be very exciting with Silverstone potentially having 3 British drivers that are actually challenging Verstappen for the race win. I think that'll be really exciting coming in 2 weeks' time. But very quickly moving on, just to run down the rest of the grid. I don't know if we want to talk about any of these, but Alpine having another strong race in their kind of battle to get back to where they were. But solid for them.
Yeah, I wanted to quickly touch on Alpine because they made the very, very controversial decision to rehire Flavio Briatore as like a assistant kind of advising director, which he's got an interesting past in Formula One. So to bring him back is quite a bold move. But I mean, they've shown real signs of progress. I think the last few weeks, once they've kind of finally sacked everyone now. So. They're at the point where they're like, well, this is what we've got. Let's just make the most of it. And
is there anyone still left at that team?
I think I might be wrong, but is it back-to-back double points races for them now? So like,
it is because that's how you got your 3-point prediction last weekend. Because Alpine got double points again in Canada.
Yeah, I mean they finally have more points than Ollie Behrman, so it's progress. I think I'm quite happy with them because I do like Pierre Gasly, and kind of on that we found out this morning he has just kind of re-signed with them for a couple of years. So I think it's good for him. It's good for them as a team to kind of, because we don't want these big manufacturers coming in and struggling in F1. Ultimately, like Alpine is like a historic racing brand. We want to see them at the front challenging. And obviously, the more teams we have doing well, the better it is for the sport. Like we don't want all of these teams like Aston Martin. Like we don't want them like struggling to get points. We want them up at the front. We want like a 6-way team fight. That'd be great. That's what everyone wants. Make it like IndyCar where everyone can win from like any position on the grid.
I mean, I think what you see with Alpine is it's not too big to fail because obviously they did that at the start of the season, but they're kind of too big to keep failing. Like they've got enough money to develop. It's not like maybe a Haas or a Sauber where you're operating on a budget or a shoestring budget, and if you don't get it right, you're kind of in that's where you're going to stay for most of the season.
They've certainly got half the sports industry investing in that one team, yes.
Like they've got too much money to keep failing, and realistically, their aim now is P5 if they continue to develop P5 in the Constructors' Championship might be up for grabs. At the very least, I think P6 is an achievable goal. And I mean, you're now kind of you've got a position where there's a lot of fighting for those final points, where you've now got Haas, because Haas are like they're not the quickest, but they're normally up there. I think Hülkenberg was 11th as far as I'm aware, so they're always up there. I mean, you've got RB who had a bit of a poor race at this one, but are normally quite competitive, and now you've got Alpine as well. There is that fierce competition for those final points, and I think Alpine they've shown a track record of development now, and I don't see why it won't continue. And then obviously that should bring them points in the next few races.
Yeah, certainly. I think P6 would be quite respectable from them. Obviously, not where they wanted to be on their path from development, say at the end of last year, but certainly from where they started off, that would be very respectable. Haas, especially Hulkenberg, with another close, very cruel P11. He's been there so many times this season, and unfortunately haven't obviously got any points from that. Unfortunately. Aston Martin not doing very well. Sauber where they are. RB again where they are. I thought perhaps expected a bit more from Albon as well. That would be the only other driver I perhaps touched upon. I think he had quite a poor showing. Obviously having that moment in the gravel and didn't really look like getting anywhere. I mean, obviously all 20 drivers were still in the race, and so perhaps not really. You wouldn't be saying any potential for points as such. But just compared to how strong of a showing he's had in previous races this season, and how good we know he can be in that Williams car, maybe just perhaps an off day for him, I'd say. But
I don't think the Williams is that good. I think it's only the ninth.
Just generally.
Well, no, I think it's you've got Williams and Sauber are just a step below everyone else. Like I mentioned, obviously the teams before. Like there are obviously the top four teams, the four teams that are fighting for the remaining points, like Aston Martins, your RBs, your Haas's, and now your Alpines. And then you've got Sauber and Williams who just they won't be able to get those points unless there's a chaotic race, because there are just 16 cars quicker than them. And I think for Williams and Sauber, it's one of those where 1 point might make the difference between 9th and 10th in the Constructors' Championship.
Yeah,
but
certainly.
I don't think that it's really easy for Albon and Sargent as well to perform when they're in machinery that I just don't think offers them a chance to really perform. I just don't think that car is that good.
No, I agree, and it's maybe obviously we know that they had maybe a bit of an improvement in previous seasons, but I think there's been a lot of teams this season that have made improvements, mainly Haas, that have made quite a big leap compared to where they were last season, and they haven't really moved anywhere, and so they've just been bogged down. So unfortunate for them, but I think that pretty much runs through the whole grid. We've talked quite a bit on them, so we should touch on our predictions from Spain. So from last weekend in Canada, the scorelines were sitting very closely on 57 apiece between Will Kingswood and Chime. Unfortunately, he couldn't be here today. And then just 1 point behind was Will Biddles. So reviewing the predictions, so I think I did Will Biddles' predictions from last week because unfortunately he couldn't attend. Do you have the predictions, or did you want me to read them out, Will? I don't mind.
Yeah, I don't have them, so if you want to do that, that's fine.
Yeah, that's fine. Well, my top 5 was actually fairly good, but my 1, 2, and 3 point predictions, I had an absolute shocker. So I put Verstappen and Norris both P1 and P2. I had first pick, so I was able to pick Verstappen. And so I got 6 points from the top 2 places. I said Piastri would finish P3. Obviously, he had a not a very good showing in P7. Leclerc, I said, was P4, and he was P5. So that's 1 point from that. And then I said Russell would be in P5, and he obviously finished P4. I got those 2 drivers the wrong way around. So that would come to 8 points for my top 5. And unfortunately, 8 points is going to be my score or Will's score for the weekend. I should apologise. So I put for my 1 point prediction, both McLarens would finish in the top 6. Perhaps a bit harsh for me. I should have thought of maybe an easier one, but oh well. Obviously, Piastri finishing P7, so that didn't happen. Haas gets into Q3 for my 2-pointer. That did not happen. And for my 3-pointer, I predicted no non-DRS assisted overtakes. I was thinking that it was mainly going to be the overtake at the end of turn one, which obviously it was, but then we did see. I can't remember. I think we saw maybe one of the Williams overtaking another into one of the end chicanes or something. There was definitely a non-DRS.
Hamilton got past Alonso, I want to say, at turn
Yes.
4. And then I guess if you want to be, we're doing all this. We had like the Russell Norris battle. The switch.
Yes, that certainly happened
well.
in the switchback. So that was a great bit of racing. We haven't actually mentioned that. That was brilliant. But yeah, so nothing for that. So I finished on 8 points, which takes Will up to 64 points. Cool. Will, did you want to go for yours next?
Yeah, I'll go for mine next. I did, I think, all right. So I think I had the third pick as far as I'm aware. So I went for Leclerc P1. Obviously didn't happen, but that is a point. I went Norris P2, so 3 points there. Verstappen I put as P3, so another point. Sainz P4 did finish outside the top 5, so 9 points there. And then Hamilton in 5th, and obviously came in 3rd. So that is another point as well. So that's 6 points for my top 5. And again, 6 points is where I'm staying. My 1 point prediction was an Alonso top 8. He finished 12th, I think. Quite a poor performance from the Aston Martin this week. My 2 point prediction were 3 cars in blue would finish in the P11 to P15, so either 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, or 15th. There was one. It was Daniel Ricciardo in 15th, so no points there. And then my 3 point prediction was a Red Bull 1-2, and I got half of that, and it was the expected half that let me down in P2. So only 6 points from my predictions there.
Yeah, so that means that Will has just overtaken you, so you're now on 63 points, but still very close. We're celebrating on our camera. And then I'll read out Jimmy's quickly, as again, unfortunately, he couldn't be here today. So Jimmy said that he put Norris P1. He put Norris P1 and Verstappen P2, so he got the right kind of battle at the front, I suppose, but in the wrong order. He then put Leclerc as the final place on the podium. He obviously finished P5. Hamilton in P4. Hamilton obviously finished P3 in the race. And then Piastri in P5 and no points from that. So all of us, I guess, kind of got similar ideas as to who would be up there. We all were perhaps a bit too optimistic with Piastri. So that takes Chime to, I think, just 4 points from his top 5. Then we said, then Chime said 3 different teams on the podium. That was correct. We had a Red Bull, a McLaren, and a Mercedes. He said at least 3 RBs in Q3, and that was unfortunately wrong. Both RBs, Visa Cash App, whatever you want to call it, finished outside. They went out in Q1. And then Alpine double engine DNF. You got if it was a double points finish, you got the wrong double. It was not a double engine DNF, unfortunately. So that means that he finishes on, 5 points. So an even worse showing from Chime there. He finishes on 60. That gets him up to 62 points. So it's Chime now behind on 62, Will Kingswood in second, 63, and Will Biddles on 64 points. But still very close and all to play for as we go into Austria. We should be getting out an Austria preview before the practice or qualifying on Saturday. It will be up very soon, in which we'll do our predictions for that race. But until then, do we have anything else that we wanted to mention for Spain?
Actually, I wanted to bring up something quickly. Well, what's your opinion on the kind of, not argument, but conversation that Sainz and Leclerc had after of the race?
What was the conversation? I missed this.
Basically, Leclerc was he was just being a bit trying to show off, didn't need to be overtaking on him. And then Sainz responded by saying that Leclerc's complaining too much. after the race. But like, I get his point because there is always something to complain about. Like as a Ferrari fan, like there is like you don't need to be sending one up the inside of your teammate when you meant like ultimately. Sometimes like, oh yeah, I was pushing because I had more pace. Well, that messed up your strategy, didn't it? Because you then end up falling behind him. So if you'd done what your teammate had done, maybe you would have had a better result and you could have worked together. But no, you had to try and make it all about you at your home race, Carlos.
They only have to put up with each other for another half of a season. Surely they can
I think they get on. I think Sykes was just annoyed because it was his home race and he got outperformed by his teammate who had won his home race.
I mean, he certainly had better performances, and it's a shame that thing landed at his home Grand Prix. But then, in fairness, Alonso finished P12, so the other Spaniard in that race is even worse.
Yeah,
wasn't a good day for the Spaniards. No.
I mean, I get that Leclerc moans a lot, but I've never looked at what Leclerc's moaned at and gone, you know what, that's a bit weird. Like, I get every time what he's moaned about. Like, your teammate shouldn't be sending one up the inside and like late on. Like, yeah, if it's like fine, you can make it steely, sure. But like, you've done a Daniel Kvyat in China like a couple of years ago where he's just torpedoed up the inside and gone, sod it, I want to be in front of you.
I'm not having that Kvyat slander. That was a perfectly valid racing move.
Yeah, that was an interesting point. The other thing I want to talk about that we've not really talked about qualifying was it might have even been in practice actually when there were like two like drivers aggressively swiping at each other. So I don't know if you guys saw this. So you had Lance Stroll kind of drove into Lewis Hamilton after Hamilton just parked himself in the apex, and then the Leclerc Norris one I think is interesting because like Leclerc is probably too close to Norris, but Norris does come out. Like Norris is still on the apex and starts to move out before Leclerc's moved away, and I'm like. Basically, the British media made it look like Norris is completely innocent because he's a British driver. Is my opinion.
I mean, they were just weird incidents.
They were both very strange.
Yeah,
it's Lance Stroll. I'm not surprised.
The Stroll one, I thought Stroll was like, yeah, you should have had a reprimand. Like, there's no way you're getting like you have no like you clearly see him turn the steering wheel to get away, like to go into Lewis basically. And like that is just stupid. Whereas like the Norris Leclerc one was like it was heated at the end of practice 3. Like, what are you doing? Just like
I think we just gotta hope we don't see like more of it because it's not good to use your car as a battering ram.
Oh, who knows? We might actually see a crash.
You guys don't want to see more of it. Oh, I think it's drama. It's great. Adds talking points to the weekend. I mean, I don't know why the battle's heating up. It's round whatever on 10. Of the F1 calendar, and they're fighting over like P2 or 3 in the P2 in the constructors, and it's I don't think it's that necessary, but it's fun nonetheless. I'd say.
Yeah, we'll have to wait and see. Obviously, what happens, and see if there's more of this in Austria next week. Yes,
we will certainly be tuning into Austria to see how that gets on. But yes, anyway, we shall leave it there. So yes, again, tune into our Austria preview, and until next time, goodbye.